Hard work is not a talent. It's not even a choice. It's a neurochemical addiction you can build. When you train your brain to love effort, real effort, you unlock a version of yourself that doesn't just survive stress, it thrives in it. Most people try to avoid discomfort. High achievers, they program their minds to seek it out, because deep inside your brain there is a switch. And once you flip it, your entire relationship with work, fatigue, and discipline will change forever. Today, I'm going to show you how to flip that switch. Dopamine is not the molecule of pleasure. It's the molecule of pursuit. It doesn't spike when you achieve the reward, it spikes when you chase it. Most people misunderstand this. They believe motivation comes after results, that the thrill comes after the victory, but neuroscience tells a different story. If you want to fall in love with hard work, you have to rewire your brain to crave the process, not the prize. That begins by understanding how dopamine works. Your brain is constantly evaluating what's worth doing. When you sit down to work, dopamine levels either rise, telling your system, "This is meaningful, keep going," or they don't, leaving you bored, distracted, and frustrated. The key is this: dopamine doesn't only come from external rewards. It comes from internal reinforcement, from what you focus on, how you frame your effort, and what you tell yourself in the process of working. If you constantly say, "I'll be happy when I finish," your brain learns to associate pain with effort and relief with quitting. Over time, this programs you to avoid starting anything hard, but if you say, "I'm proud that I'm working," or "this grind is shaping me," your brain starts to release dopamine during the effort. This turns discipline into desire. It makes grit feel good. Elite performers, athletes, entrepreneurs, and military leaders don't just tolerate hard work. They train themselves to enjoy it. They've taught their brains that sweat, pain, and fatigue are not obstacles to success. They are the signals of it. They've rewired their dopamine systems to associate growth with exertion. This is not just mental toughness. It's neurochemical control. There's a science to building this mindset. When you deliberately reflect on your effort, not the outcome, your brain registers that work itself as rewarding. For example, after a hard workout, don't just celebrate finishing. Say, "I pushed through resistance, and that made me stronger." After deep focus on a project, don't rush to check off the task. Take a second to say, "That was intense, and I stayed with it." These reflections matter. They condition the brain to chase intensity, not avoid it. This kind of dopamine wiring doesn't happen overnight, but every time you link a positive internal dialogue to effort, you're reinforcing a reward loop. Your neurons fire differently, your circuitry strengthens. Eventually, the hard thing becomes the wanted thing. You stop waiting to feel motivated, and instead, motivation meets you inside the work. The beauty of this system is that it's not limited by talent, background, or luck. It's accessible to anyone willing to reframe how they see effort. Your brain is plastic, meaning it's always changing. And when you change what your brain values, you change what you're capable of. That is how you train your brain to love hard work, not by chasing goals, but by learning to crave the climb. Most people go through life avoiding discomfort at all costs. They turn up the heat when it's cold, reach for noise when it's quiet, and retreat to comfort the moment stress appears. But here's the truth: comfort is the enemy of growth. If you want to become mentally unbreakable, if you want to train your brain to love hard work, you have to deliberately step into discomfort. Not once, not randomly, but consistently and with purpose. Deliberate discomfort isn't about punishing yourself. It's about building a brain that doesn't flinch in the face of stress. Controlled exposure to challenge, whether that's cold, silence, fatigue, or emotional strain, literally rewires your neural circuitry. It teaches your nervous system that intensity is not a threat. It is something to be managed, endured, and eventually desired. The more you lean into discomfort, the more your tolerance expands, and when your tolerance expands, so does your capacity for high-performance effort. This isn't theory, it's biology. When you voluntarily face discomfort, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision making, emotional regulation, and self-control, becomes more active and resilient. Simultaneously, the amygdala, your fear and threat detection center, becomes less reactive. In simpler terms, the brain gets better at staying calm and focused under pressure. What used to feel overwhelming becomes manageable. What once triggered panic now triggers resolve. Consider cold exposure. Sitting in freezing water, even for a few minutes, floods your system with stress signals. Your heart races. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your mind screams, "Get out." But if you stay, if you breathe, focus, and ride the wave, you're teaching your brain that you are in control, not the stimulus. That lesson carries into everything else. The same applies to fasting, intense workouts, silent solitude, or tackling mentally exhausting tasks. These aren't random acts of suffering, they are neurochemical training grounds. Mental endurance is not gifted. It is built, and it is built through friction. Discomfort reveals where your edge is, and it invites you to push past it. Over time, the line between discomfort and growth starts to blur. What felt hard at first becomes normal. Then it becomes necessary. This is how you develop a mind that not only tolerates challenge, but seeks it out, because it has learned that real reward lies on the other side of resistance. The reason most people never reach their potential is because they misunderstand fatigue. They think tiredness means stop. They think stress means something is wrong, but for the trained brain, those are green lights. When the body is shaking, when the mind is strained, when you feel like quitting, that's when you're reprogramming your limits. That's when your mental muscle is breaking down and rebuilding. Growth lives inside those moments. Controlled discomfort also builds discipline because it takes away the illusion of choice. When you deliberately choose the cold, the silence, or the grind, you're telling your brain, "I run toward challenge, not away from it." That identity compounds. Each rep of discomfort is a vote for the person you want to become. Not just tougher, but clearer, more focused, more deliberate, the kind of person who doesn't need to feel ready in order to act. The good news is that discomfort doesn't have to be extreme to be effective. It just has to be consistent. A cold shower, a difficult conversation, waking up early, working without distraction, sitting in silence, doing the thing you least want to do. These are small, powerful acts of rebellion against the comfort culture. Each one teaches your nervous system to embrace intensity rather than escape it. And that is the real gift. When your brain no longer fears the hard thing, nothing can stop you. You become someone who thrives under pressure, who seeks challenge like fuel, who grows in the dark and shows up in the storm. You don't just survive discomfort, you dominate it. That's how mental endurance is built. And that's how you train your brain to crave the climb. Repetition is the foundation of transformation. Every time you choose effort over ease, every time you resist the pull of comfort and push into discomfort, you are doing far more than just completing a task. You are rewiring your brain. This isn't motivational language, it's neuroscience. Your brain is not a fixed organ, it's plastic. It changes, molds, and adapts based on the inputs you give it. And the most powerful input is repetition. Each decision you make, whether to stay in bed or get up, to scroll your phone or start that project, to train or to quit, sends a signal through your brain's neural pathways. When you choose ease, you strengthen the circuits of distraction, procrastination, and avoidance. But when you consistently choose effort, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, you activate and reinforce a different part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. This region is responsible for self-discipline, focus, long-term thinking, and goal-directed behavior. And like any muscle, it grows with use. The more frequently you engage this part of your brain through effortful action, the more efficient those neural pathways become. Imagine walking through tall grass. At first, it's difficult, the path isn't clear, you're pushing against resistance. But walk that same path every day, and the grass starts to flatten. Eventually, it becomes a trail. That's what repetition does to your brain. It turns deliberate action into automatic behavior. At first, this process feels unnatural. Your biology is built to conserve energy, to avoid unnecessary effort. But repetition teaches the brain a new rule: that effort is valuable. It begins to interpret strain not as danger, but as growth. And once that switch flips, you don't need to force discipline anymore. Your brain begins to seek the challenge because it recognizes the reward that lives inside of it. This is why consistency is more powerful than intensity. One extreme burst of effort doesn't rewire your brain, but repeated, sustained choices, even small ones, do. 10 minutes of focused work every day will create stronger neural pathways than 2 hours of chaotic effort once a week. What matters most is frequency. Every single repetition reinforces the identity of the person you're becoming. Every time you do what's hard instead of what's easy, you cast a vote for the disciplined version of yourself. Over time, something incredible happens. Discipline becomes who you are, not a temporary mood, not something you have to force. It becomes your default operating system. Your brain stops negotiating with laziness. The resistance gets quieter. The friction fades. That's because repetition not only strengthens neural connections, it reduces the energy required to activate them. The pathway becomes more efficient, less effortful, more automatic. This is how high performers operate, not through constant motivation, but through built-in systems of behavior that have been installed through repetition. They don't rely on emotion to take action, they rely on wiring. And that wiring was earned through thousands of unseen decisions to choose the harder path. You don't need to be gifted, you don't need to be extraordinary, you need to be repetitive, you need to show up again and again and choose effort. Because every time you do, your brain changes, and when your brain changes, your behavior follows. This is the science of self-mastery. This is how discipline stops being something you chase and starts being something you are. Real, lasting discipline doesn't come from chasing outcomes. It comes from embodying an identity. When you stop asking, "What do I want to achieve?" and start asking, "Who do I want to become?" everything changes. The most powerful force in human behavior is identity. When you deeply believe, "I am the kind of person who loves the grind," your brain doesn't just take orders, it starts to rewire itself to make that belief true. Your thoughts, actions, and emotions begin to align with that identity, often without you even realizing it. Most people set goals. They want to lose weight, start a business, learn a skill. They define success by the outcome, and they attach their motivation to a finish line. But outcomes are fragile. They rely on external validation, and when things get hard, when progress stalls or failure shows up, they lose momentum. That's because their identity hasn't changed. They're still the same person trying to act differently. But identity, first thinking flips that. Instead of asking, "What do I want?" you ask, "What would a disciplined person do right now?" This shift activates something deep in your psychology. When you claim a new identity, "I'm an athlete," "I'm a focused person," "I'm someone who thrives under pressure," your brain begins to filter your experiences through that lens. Every challenge becomes a test of that identity. Every decision becomes an opportunity to reinforce it. You start aligning behavior to belief, not mood. This is how consistency is born, not from forcing action, but from protecting identity. Neuroscience backs this. The brain has something called the default mode network, a system that processes self-referential thinking. When you repeat thoughts like "I'm lazy" or "I hate hard work," this network strengthens those connections, making those behaviors more likely. But when you consciously choose empowering self-identities, "I'm resilient," "I show up no matter what," you start to prune away the old circuitry and build new, more aligned connections. That's not inspiration. That's neuroplasticity in action. The most disciplined people in the world don't wait for motivation. They don't need willpower to do the work. Why? Because the work is part of who they are. Their identity pulls them into action. The moment you tell yourself, "This is what I do," your brain stops negotiating. You stop needing perfect conditions. You stop needing to feel ready. You just act because you're acting in alignment with who you believe you are. Every decision is a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. Every workout, every session of deep work, every uncomfortable conversation, every act of patience, these aren't just habits. They are identity reinforcements, and the more votes you cast, the harder it becomes to argue against your new identity. Eventually, your actions and your beliefs match. That's when discipline becomes effortless. Outcomes still matter, but they become a byproduct, not the focus. When you build from identity, results become inevitable. You don't have to chase them. And work, day after day, changed, and the externally results show up as proof of who you've become. So if you want to love hard work, stop fixating on the finish line. Start showing up like someone who already loves the grind. Speak it, believe it. Prove it to yourself through consistent action. Let your identity lead and let your results follow. That's how transformation becomes permanent, not by trying harder, but by becoming someone else entirely. Rest is often misunderstood. In a world obsessed with productivity, rest is either ignored or misused. People either burn themselves out trying to hustle nonstop, or escape into rest as a form of avoidance. But real rest, strategic rest, is not about escape. It's a tool, and when used properly, it makes you sharper, more focused, and more resilient. But when used as an emotional exit from discomfort, it trains your brain to fear effort, to avoid pressure, and to associate fatigue with failure. Your brain is a tool. It needs cycles, effort and recovery, strain and reset. Just like muscles grow during rest, not just during exertion, your cognitive systems recover and strengthen when you deliberately give them space. High-performance thinkers, elite athletes, military operators, they all understand this. Rest isn't weakness. It's precision, it's preparation, but what separates them from everyone else is why they rest. When you rest to sharpen, you give your brain permission to rebuild. You disconnect not to escape effort, but to enhance it. You sleep deeply, not because you're tired of life, but because you're training for a better one. You take breaks, not because you're avoiding hard things, but because you want to come back stronger, clearer, and more powerful. This is intentional recovery. It's disciplined, it's structured, and it's strategic. But most people don't rest like that. They rest to avoid. They get tired, and instead of confronting the fatigue, they numb it with dopamine, scrolling, binging, snacking, zoning out. They let fatigue become an excuse to disconnect from effort entirely. And over time, their brain begins to equate tiredness with weakness. It learns that the moment things get hard, the answer is to run. That pattern doesn't just sabotage productivity, it rewires your response to stress. The very circuits that should activate under pressure instead collapse into avoidance. This is why building a healthy relationship with rest is crucial. You don't avoid the gym because your muscles are sore. You train smarter. The same applies to your mind. If you're mentally fatigued, the solution isn't to run, it's to recover with purpose, a cold shower, a 20-minute nap, a quiet walk with no phone, journaling, focused breath work. These aren't acts of laziness, they're tools to calm the nervous system and prepare it for another round of battle. The difference is in how and why you rest. When rest is used correctly, it becomes a weapon. It allows you to operate at full capacity over and over again. It teaches your brain that recovery is part of the process, not the opposite of it. You stop associating fatigue with failure. Instead, you recognize it as feedback, a signal that you've pushed, that your mind is adapting, that it's time to reload. That mindset is what separates people who burn out from those who rise again and again. And here's what happens when you shift your perspective. Your brain stops fearing work. It knows there is relief, not escape, recalibration, not collapse. The cycle of effort and recovery becomes rhythmic, not random. You show up hard, you step away smart, you sharpen, then you attack again, sharper than before. So rest, but don't hide. Recover, but don't retreat. Use rest as a tool, not a timeout from your life, but a tactic to dominate it. Because when you rest with purpose, you don't just recharge your energy. You rewire your brain to respect the grind, not run from it. And that is how you become unstoppable. If you want to fall in love with hard work, you have to stop celebrating only the wins. Results are important, but they're not sustainable fuel. If you train your brain to only feel pleasure after the outcome, you build a fragile system. One that collapses under failure, one that only works when everything goes right. But the truth is, most of life is lived in the space between the effort and the result. If you want to be truly unstoppable, you have to learn to chemically reward effort itself. That's how you become addicted to the process, not the prize. The brain's reward system runs on dopamine, and dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about motivation. It's the signal that says, this is good, do it again. But what most people don't realize is that you can control what your brain attaches dopamine to. You can consciously train it to release dopamine not when you succeed, but when you struggle, not when you cross the finish line, but when you show up and give your all, regardless of the outcome. This shift is powerful because the moment you start associating effort with internal reward, you take your power back. You no longer wait for validation. You don't need applause, recognition, or a trophy to feel proud. You feel it the second you walk out of the gym drenched in sweat, the moment you hit save, after 2 hours of deep work. When you show up tired, sore, distracted, but still choose to push, that's where the win lies, and when you teach your brain to feel good there, you stop negotiating with laziness. The science is clear. If you delay gratification and pair dopamine with effort, not results, your drive increases. You want to do it again, and again, and again. This is how high performers become obsessed with the grind. They're not superhuman. They've just rewired their brains to enjoy the work itself. They don't suffer through the process to get to the reward. The process is the reward, and it makes them unstoppable. But here's the key. This doesn't happen automatically. You have to train it. That means after the work, no matter how painful, imperfect, or unrewarded it feels externally, you consciously say to yourself, that was the win. You reflect on the struggle and feel pride in it. You remind your brain, this is what we do. You smile after the strain. You feel gratitude for the grind. This isn't just mindset. It's neurochemistry. Every time you do that, you build stronger pathways between effort and reward. This mindset also makes you anti-fragile. When others fall apart because they didn't hit the target, you're still moving. Why? Because you've learned to reward consistency, not outcomes. You've built your identity around showing up, not just winning. So failure doesn't break you, it fuels you. It becomes another rep in the gym of mental strength. Eventually, the lines blur. You don't need the results to validate you anymore. You're not desperate to get to the end because you've fallen in love with the middle. You're addicted to the discipline. You crave the discomfort because your brain has learned that the real dopamine comes after the effort, not the trophy. So if you want to build relentless motivation, stop saving your celebration for the final moment. Start celebrating the reps, the focus, the fatigue, the discomfort. Catch yourself in the hard part and smile. That's when the change is happening. That's when the brain is listening. Train it to say, yes, this is where I thrive. And soon enough, you won't just tolerate the grind, you'll love it. Everything begins and ends with the brain. If you want to become someone who doesn't just endure hard work, but craves it, you have to rewire the way your mind responds to challenge, discomfort, and effort. Discipline isn't born from talent or motivation. It's built through repetition, forged in deliberate struggle, and reinforced by the stories you tell yourself. When you understand the dopamine system, you stop waiting for rewards and start linking pleasure to the process. When you expose yourself to discomfort, you teach your brain that intensity is not a threat, it's fuel. When you choose effort over ease again and again, you reshape your brain's architecture, making discipline automatic. And it doesn't stop there. When you shift your focus from outcomes to identity, when you begin to believe that you are the kind of person who loves the grind, your actions start to reflect that belief. You stop running from fatigue and learn to rest as a tool, not an escape. You stop fearing failure and start celebrating the work itself. You reprogram your reward system to light up after the effort, not just the win, and that's where the shift happens. That's when work stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like purpose. This isn't about working harder, it's about working smarter with your biology. Align your brain with your values, make effort your reward, and soon, what once felt like resistance becomes your rhythm. What once felt impossible becomes automatic. That's how you train your brain to love hard work. That's how you become unbreakable.